God, I look at myself up there and I look awful.
See,
I don't know, she
did
came that way.
Did this frighten you to be engulfed in this snake, be wrapped up?
No.
Didn't frighten you?
No.
Now, he's got his tongue there.
I think she was, or he was more frightened than I was.
Nastassja Kinski, one of the most legendary faces in European cinema. A symbol of fragile beauty, surreal eyes, and a haunting silence unlike anything the silver screen had ever known. From an unknown teenage girl in Munich, she walked straight into the heart of the art world, becoming Roman Polanski's muse, a global sex symbol in cat people, and the quiet yet burning soul of Paris, Texas. Not even 20, she left Hollywood stunned. Renowned directors fought to write scripts just for her. She won a Golden Globe. She stood alongside Marcello Mastroianni, Francis Ford Coppola, Al Pacino, and the world spoke her name. Not in roaring applause, but in a stunned silence before a beauty no one could ever touch. Yet, the brighter the spotlight, the darker the shadows behind it. She was once confined in a psychiatric hospital after breaking down. She admitted her family past was a darkness no one dared to confront. She loved recklessly, madly, to the point of not realizing she was being wounded. Her father, the legendary actor Klaus Kinski, the man who brought her to art, was also the one who turned her childhood into hell. As a teenager, she was abused, pushed into roles before her body was even grown, sexualized by cinema, exploited by directors, and consumed by a world that craved the silence of a perfect muse, beautiful, talented, and compliant. If those eyes once haunted you, if that face once etched itself into a frame you could never forget, then leave a like as a thank you for the years she lived not for herself, but for us, for art, and for the eternity of beauty. And stay until the end of this video, because what you are about to discover about the real life of Nastassja Kinski may forever change the way you see cinema. Berlin, January 24th, 1961. A baby girl was born with a peculiar name, Nastassja Aglaya Nakshinsky. Even before she could speak, she carried both a legacy and a curse. Her father was none other than Klaus Kinski, a genius actor, but also one of the most controversial figures in European cinema history. Her mother, Ruth Brigitte Toki, was an ordinary, quiet woman living outside the limelight, destined to become the only shield between her daughter and the darkness the outside world could never imagine. When Nastassja was 8, the marriage between Klaus and Ruth collapsed. Klaus walked away, leaving mother and daughter to struggle in a small apartment in Munich. With no stable job and no support, Ruth had no choice but to rely on her daughter. By the age of 13, Nastassja was no longer a child. She modeled, took minor roles in cheap films, not out of passion, but because her mother needed food on the table and rent had to be paid. But no matter the distance, Klaus Kinski remained an inescapable ghost. He was not only the eccentric artist known for his manic screen performances, but also a man infamous for uncontrollable fits and deviant behavior far beyond moral bounds. In his own memoir, Klaus boasted of violence and abuse without a shred of remorse. Years later, Nastassja, in a voice soft but glacial, confirmed the public's darkest suspicions. She had been abused by her own father. No theatrics, no details, just a truth sharp as a blade, flung into the air and left to linger in a silence as heavy as a graveyard. Her childhood, if it could even be called that, was a series of scars appearing long before lipstick ever touched her lips. As a teenager, she was once arrested for riding public transport without a ticket. She refused to pay the fine, refused to justify herself. She spent 5 days in jail at a time when she was already rising to fame in Germany. The press pounced, but Nastassja stayed silent. She would rather be locked away than explain. At 15, while playing around with a boyfriend, a minor accident left a long scar across her left cheek, a mark that would become a symbol of her entire life. Beauty that had been wounded. No one covered it up. No one asked her to erase it with surgery. And on screen, that scar existed not only on her skin, but also in her gaze. Eyes both fragile and defiant, daring the world to look away. Nastassja did not grow up in classrooms or on playgrounds. She grew up on film sets, where adults spoke of her as a tool, not as a child. The lights shone on her face, but they never warmed the soul frozen within. From the very beginning, she learned one rule: either stay silent or be devoured. She chose silence. No interviews, no talk shows, no memoirs to justify her life. Yet she never avoided raw roles, never shied away from controversial scenes. For her, silence was not weakness, it was confrontation. And so, the girl once caught without a bus ticket, once abused by her father, once splashed across tabloid headlines for a jail stint, became a symbol of desire, a true femme fatale of European cinema. Not because she was beautiful, but because she was real, real in a way no one could ever fully explain. Nastassja Kinski entered the world of cinema not through a glamorous invitation, but with a wordless gaze in the shadows of a Munich nightclub at just 14 years old. Too young even to be served a drink, she accidentally caught the eye of actress Lisa Kreutzer, the wife of director Wim Wenders. No audition, no casting. With a single look, she was placed straight into the film The Wrong Move, Falsche Bewegung, 1975. In the role of Mignon, a mute girl accompanying the protagonist on a journey across Germany, Nastassja spoke no lines, yet her expressions resonated louder than any words. Eyes heavy with sorrow, a small figure swept along as if by the wind, always carrying an unsettling, haunting presence. It was not just her first role, but a sketch of her entire cinematic identity, a beauty defined by silence, and a quietness that seemed to conceal something no one was meant to uncover. In 1977, at just 15 years old, she took on another shocking role, Sina Wolf, a 17-year-old schoolgirl in the Reifezeugnis episode of the famous crime series Tatort, directed by Wolfgang Petersen. Sina was a girl caught up in an inappropriate relationship with her teacher, a subject far too sensitive for society, let alone for a girl still so immature. When her classmates discovered the affair and threatened to expose her, Sina's character resorted to murder to keep the secret. The film immediately set off a media storm, not only because of its shocking storyline, but also due to the daring scenes that Kinsky, still a very young actress, had performed. 25 million Germans watched that episode when it first aired, and millions of eyes dissected her body, her dark and fragile gaze, as if it were no longer a performance, but a public confession. Years later, in one of her rare breaks of silence, Kinsky softly admitted that she had felt uncomfortable with some of the scenes and had even asked the producers to cut them. But at the time, no one asked if she wanted to. No one asked if she was okay. Because she was Nastassja Kinski, the girl the world believed was born to be sensual, to seduce, to provoke, even at just 15 years old. And then, that same year, she appeared in Hammer Films' Horror to the Devil, a Daughter, playing Catherine, A young girl raised within a satanic cult where the female body was nothing more than a tool for ritual. Wedged between two towering icons, Christopher Lee and Richard Widmark, Kinsky was not overshadowed. On the contrary, she left audiences unsettled. How could someone so young project such depth, such inner turmoil? It was on that set that she met director Roman Polanski, a man who had survived his own personal tragedies with a unique gift for recognizing hidden pain. He didn't just see a beautiful face, he saw a soul already bruised by experiences no one should endure so early in life. Polanski urged Kinsky to go to America to study at the Lee Strasberg Theater and Film Institute, the cradle of method acting, where inner wounds could be transformed into art. For many, it was simply career advice. For Kinsky, it was a lifeline. The first time someone told her, "You are not just a body, you are an artist." And so she left Germany, left Europe, the place that had confined her within the image of a manipulated Lolita, to search for a different definition of herself in America. For the first time, she learned how to act, rather than merely endure pain and call it performance. For the first time, she had the power to choose. And for the first time, she believed. Perhaps she was not only the product of tragedy. After returning from the United States and completing her training at the Lee Strasberg Theater and Film Institute in the late 1970s, Nastassja Kinski entered the brightest chapter of her life, a brief yet blazing period that seemed poised to crown her as an irreplaceable global icon. She was no longer just the girl with sorrowful European eyes. She had become Hollywood's new promise, living proof that quiet beauty could also reach the summit. In 1978, at only 17, Kinsky starred in the Italian film Così come sei, Stay as You Are, alongside the legendary Marcello Mastroianni. The film tackled a provocative theme, the relationship between a middle-aged man and a young woman, yet it avoided scandal through the raw honesty of its portrayal, carried not by dialogue, but by Kinsky's unflinching eyes and unguarded inner life, transcending her years. That role became the first key to unlock the American market, placing her among Europe's most internationally promising faces. Soon after, destiny reunited her with Roman Polanski in his masterpiece, Tess, 1979, adapted from Thomas Hardy's novel. Polanski, still reeling from the wreckage of his personal tragedies, poured his soul into the film, a belated farewell to his murdered wife, Sharon Tate. And Kinsky, like a ghost stepping out of the past, inhabited Tess with the fragility of a young woman crushed by fate. She did not play Tess. She was Tess, a soul so beautiful it had to be punished. The film earned Kinsky the Golden Globe in 1981 for New Star of the Year in a Motion Picture and made her a phenomenon. No longer just a European sensation, no longer the girl defined by controversial roles. She was now an official face of world cinema. Hollywood welcomed her with both curiosity and ambition. Francis Ford Coppola, fresh off the triumph of Apocalypse Now, chose Kinsky for his next project. One from the Heart, 1981, a film he envisioned as a new chapter in visual storytelling. But big dreams came with even bigger risks. What began as a modest production quickly spiraled out of control when Coppola, in a burst of artistic fervor, built an entire miniature Las Vegas inside a studio, using elaborate lighting and stagecraft to create a world both real and dreamlike. The result? The budget ballooned to over $25 million. The cast lacked box office power, Kinsky was still an unfamiliar name to American audiences, and her co-star Frederick Forrest could not carry the crowds. Released with little promotion and no connection to mainstream viewers, One from the Heart grossed a mere $600,000, becoming one of Hollywood's most infamous financial disasters of the early 1980s. Coppola's Zoetrope Studios teetered on the brink of bankruptcy, and Kinsky, though hardly to blame, was dragged down with it. Her name became tied to a box office flop, and in Hollywood, where an actor's worth is measured in profit, she began to be viewed with caution. But she did not stop. In 1982, Kinsky starred in Cat People, a remake of the 1942 horror classic. As Irina, a woman cursed to transform into a panther whenever she felt the stirrings of desire, Kinsky embodied the raw face of repressed instinct. Director Paul Schrader crafted a world steeped in sensuality and the supernatural, where Kinsky's character was at once tragic and dangerous, alluring yet untouchable. Though not a runaway hit at the box office, Cat People reaffirmed one truth. Kinsky was not an actress searching for roles. Strange, perilous roles sought her. She refused to conform to molds. She did not exist to please the masses. And then, in 1984, she returned in the film that would define her career. Paris, Texas, directed by Wim Wenders, the very man who had given her her first role. The film was a sorrowful love song about a lonely, fractured America. For most of its runtime, Kinsky's character, Jane, does not appear. But when she finally steps into the frame, inside a small room divided by a one-way mirror, speaking to her estranged husband without seeing his face, time itself seems to stop. No music, no crescendo. Only her eyes, wet, deep, wounded, and a voice trembling under the weight of memory. A nearly 10-minute monologue that has since been regarded as one of the most powerful emotional scenes in cinema of the 1980s. Wim Wenders later said, "I didn't need dialogue for Jane. With Nastassja, her eyes were the entire film." That role was not only the peak of Kinsky's career, it was proof that sometimes brokenness is the only vessel strong enough to carry beauty. Paris, Texas won the Palme d'Or at Cannes and is now hailed as a masterpiece of American independent cinema. And Kinsky, once typecast as a sex symbol, was transformed into an icon of pure emotion. No nudity, no provocation, only the perfectly timed silence and a gaze that could never be replicated. Yet even in that glow of triumph, shadows crept back. In 1985, she agreed to star in Revolution, an ambitious epic about the American Revolution, directed by Hugh Hudson and co-starring Al Pacino. Everything promised success: an A-list cast, a massive budget, sweeping historical settings. But a fragmented script, uneven pacing, and awkward dialogue doomed the project. Earning less than $360,000 against a budget of nearly $28 million, Revolution became one of the most humiliating flops in British cinema. Studios pulled out of major projects, directors lost opportunities, and Kinsky, though hardly at the center of the disaster, was swept into the whirlwind of doubt. Hollywood grew wary. She hadn't lost her talent, nor her beauty, but she was no longer seen as a safe bet. The big scripts stopped calling her name. And after Revolution, Nastassja Kinski was no longer considered a rising icon. She had become an enigma, too unpredictable for an industry that calculates every dollar. Throughout the years when the spotlight illuminated her striking face, Nastassja Kinski remained an enigma. a woman who lived through silent performances and loved with silences deeper than words. People saw her on the red carpet, but they never knew whose hand she held behind the curtains. She never chose predictable relationships, nor did she ever try to make them easy to understand. She loved as if only that day existed, and left as if love had never happened. At 15, in 1976, Kinsky met Roman Polanski at a party in Germany. She was still a bewildered teenager just escaping a childhood of abuse, while he was an exiled director long accustomed to scandal. Polanski brought her to America, arranged for her to study at the Lee Strasberg Institute, and cast her in the lead role of Tess, 1979, the performance that earned her a Golden Globe and opened Hollywood's gates. Public opinion exploded, rife with suspicion about the relationship between a teenage girl and a man freshly fled from a rape conviction in the U.S. But Kinsky said no. There was no physical relationship, only a kind of dangerous flirtation where she felt both respected and observed, like an artistic experiment. No one truly knows what happened between them. But one thing is certain. From that ambiguous bond, Kinsky learned to keep the deepest part of herself guarded and never to give it entirely to anyone. Even before Polanski, in 1975, when she was just 14, she entered the world of cinema under the guidance of Wim Wenders, the German director who once said he saw in her an emptiness no one else could fill. They met when she was not yet a star, only a fragile girl with eyes as cold as a Berlin winter. Years later, Wenders cast her as Jane in Paris, Texas, a role without dialogue, built only on silence and pain. During filming, they barely needed to speak. They understood each other through quietness. And if there was love, it too lived in that silence. Neither ever confirmed a relationship. But when asked, Kinsky once smiled softly. With Wim, I didn't need to speak. We were together in silences no one else could enter. Wenders, in one rare admission, called her a light I never wanted to see fade. Also in the 1980s, at the height of her fame, she met Paul Schrader, director of Cat People, 1982. Schrader once said, "Nastassja is the only actress who ever made me feel unnecessary. I didn't dare change a single frame of her performance. He was so infatuated that he planned to propose to her on the night of the wrap party." But Kinsky never showed up. No message, no explanation. Just a cold disappearance, leaving an unhealed scar in Schrader's memory. She never explained. She never explained to anyone. She loved, and then she left. Like a drifting cloud that belonged to no sky. In 1984, at 23, Kinsky gave birth to her first child, a son, Aljosha, on June 29th, the result of a fleeting romance with actor Vincent Spano, her co-star in Maria's Lovers. The affair was brief, yet they remained connected, like two people who had once wandered into each other's lives during a fleeting moment of youth. That same year, she married Egyptian director Ibrahim Musa, a swift union full of unspoken weight. They had a daughter, Sonia, born March 2nd, 1986. But after 8 years, the marriage collapsed in silence, like almost everything else in her life. In 1992, at 31, Kinsky faced a custody battle in a Rome courtroom. Ibrahim Musa wanted to keep the children in Europe, while Kinsky insisted on taking them to California, where she was seeking a new life away from the spotlight. In the end, the court ruled in her favor. But how many tears that victory cost her? No one knows, for she never spoke of it. Soon after, she entered a relationship with legendary music producer Quincy Jones, the man behind Michael Jackson's masterpieces. They lived together from 1992 to 1995 and had a daughter, Kenya, born February 9th, 1993. Kenya grew up to become a successful model, appearing in campaigns for Calvin Klein, Stella McCartney, and Vogue. Yet even while living with Quincy, Kinski kept her own apartment near UCLA, a declaration that love must never swallow freedom. They never married. When the relationship ended, neither of them said a word. 3 children, 3 fathers, 3 chapters of life, yet none long enough to be called a happy ending. Nastassja Kinski never used her private life to make magazine covers. She never appeared on talk shows, never set the record straight, never toyed with scandal. She drifted in and out of others' lives like a breeze, never leaving footprints behind. In a rare interview with the German press at age 50, Kinski said only one short sentence: "I have lived enough under the lens. The rest I want to keep for myself." That remark closed the door on curiosity, yet opened a quiet sadness without answer. Perhaps that is why she remains haunting. Less for the loves she had, and more for the feeling that we never truly understood her, and never will. Nastassja Kinski was never the star of wild parties, glittering red carpets, or loud media campaigns. She entered cinema with a single gaze and left behind a silent void in audiences' hearts that no one else could fill. Without noise, without chasing fame, she still became one of the most profound icons European cinema ever produced. Not because of her looks, but because of the darkness she carried into every role. At the peak of her career, the 1980s, when Hollywood still worshipped the image of women as sweet, accessible, and easily possessed, Kinski stood at the edge of that border, where beauty became ambiguous, cold, and something to be approached with caution. Her face, delicate yet unsettled, soft yet uninviting, gave the impression of a woman bearing a wound too deep to name. She never sought to please tastes. She never smiled cheaply. She never revealed what people wanted to hear. And precisely for that reason, she became a symbol for a generation of viewers searching for truth in art. Wim Wenders, the first to recognize it, once said, "With Nastassja, I didn't need to write much dialogue. I just let her be silent, and all the emotions would flow into the audience." Perhaps that was the only way to portray someone carrying too many unspoken things. A girl raised amid domestic violence, solitude, never taught to trust, with cinema as her only breathing space. Kinski spoke 5 languages: English, German, French, Italian, and Russian, not to flaunt herself, but because from childhood she lived like someone with no true homeland. She could slip into any nationality, circumstance, or identity, as if searching for a place to finally call home. From Tess, 1979, the rural girl crushed by society, to Paris, Texas, 1984, the mother with a sorrowful beauty needing no explanation, Kinski always chose roles of the wounded, the misunderstood, the forgotten. No one hired her just to decorate the screen. She came to remind audiences that women are not only objects of admiration, but human beings with shadows the world refuses to look at. Over more than 3 decades, the image of women through her roles began to change. No longer perfect, no longer compliant, no longer predictable, but real and deserving to be heard. Beyond acting, she explored photography and writing as a way to express what her harsh childhood had never allowed her to speak. Some of her photo exhibitions in France, Italy, and Germany, though never heavily promoted, still drew a special audience. those who loved silence, those who had once found themselves in Kinsky's gaze. They came not to take pictures with her, but to thank her for giving them a place of refuge, even if only for 90 minutes on screen. In her career, she won the Golden Globe for Tess in 1980 at just 19, the David di Donatello, the Italian Oscar, and received nominations for the César, France, and the Nastro d'Argento, Italy. But Kinski never spoke of awards. For her, the real triumph was the silence after the lights dimmed, when audiences lingered in their seats, unable to leave because something in their hearts had not yet faded. Nastassja Kinski never needed her name remembered. She never sought to be adored. She simply stepped in, left a silence, and disappeared. But that is precisely why she endures, as a beautiful secret of which each person is allowed to know only a fragment. An icon without words, without claims, without needing to be touched, yet one who never leaves the memory of those who love cinema. At 64, Nastassja Kinski is no longer the woman running away from Hollywood. She is now the survivor who has walked out of the wreckage of her past, quietly healing herself, without announcement. After decades of refusing the spotlight, she made a rare appearance at the 2024 Berlinale, an event where her father was once celebrated and where she herself had long been overshadowed by the enormous weight of her family name. Her hair now carries strands of silver, her face free of heavy makeup. Yet that same fragile aura remained, the one that once held millions of eyes captive. And then, she disappeared again. No interviews, no declarations of a comeback. She simply arrived, smiled, and left, as if soothing an old memory with the gentlest of touches. That same year, she attended the Cinema for Peace Gala in Berlin, not to draw attention, but to quietly support causes of human rights and children in pain, perhaps because they reminded her of something she herself had lost. Her Instagram is another world entirely. No makeup, no films, no fame. Only photos of silent gardens, sunlight filtering through leaves, the deep purple of evening skies, and short captions, sometimes like confessions, sometimes like prayers. In June 2024, she wrote, "I feel protected, but I also always trust and pray." A brief sentence, yet one that carried an entire journey of survival, one not everyone could endure. Today, she lives in California, in a small house tucked away in nature, far from the noise of the film industry, far from the curiosity of the press. There are only trees, books, and the quiet she had never touched in her youth. She meditates, tends her garden, and donates to charities supporting mental health, not in the name of celebrity, but as someone who once nearly failed to survive herself. Nastassja Kinski does not need to write a memoir to tell her story. Every silence she keeps today is the loudest response to all the years she was once forced into silence. And in that absence, deliberate, selective, lies her final declaration, that not everyone who was once famous needs to return. Some, after walking through everything, only wish to live enough, not to be remembered forever. Nastassja Kinski never declared herself a victim, nor did she ever claim to be an icon. Yet through her deliberate disappearance, she forced the world to confront a question. How many female talents were swallowed whole by an industry that has never known how to say, sorry? How many young girls, like Kinsky at 12, stepped onto film sets with eyes too innocent to understand life, only to have every expectation, every desire, every wave of praise and rejection imposed upon them? And among them, how many found the courage to stop, to not collapse, and still preserve their true selves. Her story is not one of glory. It is a story of limits and of surpassing them. A reminder that sometimes choosing not to continue is the bravest act of all. She was once called a muse, a goddess, a European icon, but none of those titles can measure up to one truth. She was herself, despite every definition others tried to force upon her. Nastassja Kinski does not need a comeback to be loved. She only needs enough peace to live, and enough silence to be a woman who no longer has to prove anything to the world. And perhaps, because of that, she has become immortal, not in cinema, but in the memory of those who once saw themselves reflected in her sorrowful eyes. Do you remember the last time you saw Nastassja Kinski on screen? Which scene has haunted you the most? And what is it about her that you cannot forget? Share those memories, because sometimes a single silent gaze can write chapters of life that no one else dares to tell. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you won't miss more emotional stories, the secrets behind the glitter of Hollywood's greatest legends.